Always knew someday you'd come along.
Force is strong in my family.
And a hearty welcome to one and all, back in the studio for episode 186 of the Confessions of a Not-So-Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your late Tuesday afternoon into early evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. So today is George Lucas's 80th birthday. And the younger generation may know the name. They may know what he looks like. But they probably don't know or aren't aware of just how many different trivia questions and conceptual trivia questions, in some cases, which aren't really trivia, but more of ideas and opinions, but very serious opinions. If I'm asked a question to name the single most important figure in cinema in the last 60 years, I think the answer is George Lucas, even though he's only directed 6 films. And we're being straightforward about this. The only ones that really matter are the first 3. THX 1138, which was a science fiction film he made a number of years after getting out of USC. American Graffiti, still an extraordinary film now, 50 years old, literally. And Star Wars 1977, or Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, if you prefer. Lucas directed the prequels. I mean, I like the prequels, but there wasn't anything particular about his direction that was like, oh my God. Whereas THX 1138, you say, okay, this is a major talent here. You get the same feeling in American Graffiti, and in much the same way that when people watched Jaws by his BFF, Steven Spielberg, people knew this kid has got the goods. There's never been a filmmaker with an eye like Steven Spielberg. And why is that? Because Steven Spielberg is the first major filmmaker who probably never saw a stage play, didn't give 2 shits about the theater or TV for that matter. Spielberg thought in terms of motion, pictures, movement, kineticism. George Lucas's direction in Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, marked him as a trailblazing talent. Now, it turned out that his passion wasn't actually directing movies. He was an idea guy. He was a Steve Jobs of the movie business, would be the closest correlation. Now, I'm sure Steve Jobs' IQ was higher than George Lucas, but it is not by coincidence, it is not by happenstance that George Lucas created 2 of the greatest franchises. And there are those that would argue the 2 greatest franchises, film franchises that is, ever. Star Wars and Indiana Jones. Now, if you put a gun to my head, and this is the kind of Harrison Ford question, this is all opinion, this is 100% subjective. Which character means more to the average Gen X film geek? Han Solo, Indiana Jones. I did a poll on this a couple of years ago. I think it was in honor of Harrison Ford's birthday, and I was just fucking around. 26 people took part in the poll. Which character, which George Lucas created, which character is more indelible to you as a movie fan, film buff, Gen X, historian, geek, it doesn't matter. Han Solo, Indiana Jones. It was 13-13. Small sample size, but that sounds just about right. If I'm pressed to a wall, I'm taking Indiana Jones because he's a more important character. He's the primary engine driver in all 5 Indiana Jones films. And brief recap, the Cliff Notes version, first 3 Indiana Jones films, all phenomenal. 4th film, shit. 5th film, very good. Thanks, I'll be here all week. George Lucas, though, is an idea guy. Now, maybe he could have had the directing career of his friends, and there's a great picture, I'm probably going to attach it to the beginning of this episode, when George Lucas celebrated his 50th birthday in May of 1994. Ron Howard, Robert Zemeckis, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, and Steven Spielberg, the gents got together to take their friend out for his 50th. You want to talk about an assemblage of talent? And yeah, okay, so Ron Howard and Zemeckis maybe aren't in this. Oh, and Brian De Palma. Sorry, De Palma's part of that group. He's best friends with all of those guys. Didn't have the career of any of the other ones, although he certainly made his share of indelible films as well. You fucking were the best! Say hello to my little friend! Fuss you, man. Fuss you, man. Sorry, Scarface. George Lucas went in a different direction because he was an idea man. Skywalker Ranch, Industrial Light and Magic. That was his company. Industrial Light and Magic had some of the major innovations in movie special effects. George followed his passions. He loved video games. LucasArts produced some of the best video games ever. If I'm asked the question, and there are plenty of Gen Xers that'll back me up on this, what is your single favorite graphic adventure style video game? The video game adaptation for PC, this is the days of 486 microprocessors, if that. Graphics were a little bit weak, a little bit limited. But the single greatest video game I ever played is a PC adaptation of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And I think the story was crafted by an old classmate. I think he was a classmate of Lucas, but either way, he and Lucas went way back. The guy's name is Hal Barwood. I think that I'm pretty sure he wrote that. Point is, they took the best elements of the movie and turned it into an incredible video game. And yes, 35 years on, the graphics are very weak by today's standards. But the story, the bedrock of the film story, which formed 90% of the video game, fucking incredible. And that game took me 2 months to solve, playing it at least an hour almost every day, from March to May of 1991. So 33 years ago, 17-year-old me, I couldn't do much else right. But I slowly made my way through that game. And when I think of George Lucas, yes, I think of Star Wars, and I think of the Indiana Jones series, and I think of his incredibly prolific friendship with Steven Spielberg, because Spielberg directed the first 4 Indiana Jones films and did a spectacular job on the first 3. The 4th one was doomed because they just picked the wrong script. But for me, that video game and another video game called Loom, which was unbelievable as well, totally different, and The Secret of Monkey Island, a series which has continued. My sister recently completed the most, I think that was the 5th in the series. Incredible. That is all because of George Lucas, not just being narrowly focused on movies, there's nothing wrong with that, but George Lucas having the wherewithal, financially and otherwise, but to go all out in multiple directions throughout his life. And he doesn't seem like it. You know, there are certain people that when you listen to them speak, you say, okay, this guy is not like a normal smart person. Steven Spielberg is, to me, a normal, very smart person. That's how he speaks. Francis Coppola, too. You listen to Martin Scorsese speak, he doesn't sound like a normal, really smart person. Neither does Brian De Palma, for that matter. Neither did Stanley Kubrick. But Lucas, who has a little bit of a regular guy, everyman kind of quality, is a visionary, a true visionary, and there really haven't been that many in the movie business. Orson Welles, Stanley Kubrick. Those were filmmakers who have to be considered visionaries. Kubrick did things that nobody had done before. And a lot of his movies, certainly younger people under 40, they find it a little bit cold. I don't get it. I don't get why Kubrick is such a big deal. Well, it's also your opinion. That's fine. Not everybody likes everything. And there are plenty of people who can appreciate Kubrick's place in history. They may just like The Shining and think the rest of his movies, maybe Full Metal Jacket. But hey, I'll tell you, Barry Lyndon, I think Barry Lyndon is one of the most boring movies I've ever seen. Me, the guy who sat through Last Year at Marienbad 3 times, I still don't know what happens. Who knew they were flashbacks? What was the... Barry Lyndon is boring. It does not take away from my ranking Kubrick as maybe the single, in highest esteem, cinematic visionary as far as filmmakers. But as far as overall, George Lucas can make an easy case for him. So I'm thinking of films of Lucas, and obviously he sold Star Wars to Disney in 2012, and that was when he announced, and he hadn't really been super active, but that's when he announced he was stepping back even further from the business of movie making, because there are plenty of films. And I remember in the 90s he had written a story for people really were excited about it, called Radioland Murders. That's about 30 years ago. Bombed. No good. Bad movie. But there are certain projects that he got behind that didn't quite make it. And I guess you just reach a point where you want to do something else. You want to do something else with your life. And I don't know at what point, because think of it this way. Lucas was 33 when Star Wars Episode 4 came out and got all the acclaim. I think it was nominated for at least, how many Oscars? I think they have this information here. Yeah, it was a troubled production, cultural phenomenon, and was nominated for a shit ton of Oscars. But at a certain point, when Lucas knew they were going to make at least one sequel, and maybe he had already planned out, we should be able to do a couple of movies, we just have to make sure they're good. But you would have assumed that he would take the reins for Empire Strikes Back, given that it was still his story concepts. This is not Steven Spielberg, hired gun on Jaws. That was not his project. That was David Brown and Richard Zanuck, and I think Lily Zanuck. So Jaws 2, Spielberg was probably offered the chair. No, thank you. I'm all set here. I'm okay. Well, he ended up making 1941. He might have been better off taking a crack at Jaws 2. He maybe would have made a better movie. Who knows? But at a certain point, George Lucas just didn't want to be a director. So after the incredible success of Star Wars, and I'm sure he thought about it, directing what became Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. But he turned the reins over to a veteran filmmaker whose work he adored, named Irvin Kershner. And Irvin Kershner's direction is magnificent. That's a movie that should not work as well as it does because there are multiple lines of action, and there's a lot of Mark Hamill, who, hey, we love Luke Skywalker, but there's a lot of the movie is Mark Hamill and a puppet. It's Mark Hamill and a fucking puppet. It's Yoda. It works. Bouncing back and forth between Han Solo's narrative and Vader and ideas of the Emperor and Luke doing his thing with R2 and Lando Calrissian. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is extraordinary. Lucas, even in that context, instinctively knew maybe he wasn't even the right guy for that particular story. Whatever it was, he couldn't have picked a better filmmaker. And there's nothing in Kershner's earlier films that would indicate, oh, this guy would be perfect for a space opera epic. And then Return of the Jedi. Fucking Ewoks. First hour of Return of the Jedi, for me, is as good as episodes 4 and 5. So I rank 4 and 5 equally. A New Hope is more exciting. It has the single greatest moment in the history of cinema, as far as I'm concerned. Han Solo coming to Luke Skywalker's aid. I have you now. No, you don't. Sorry, no. You don't have shit. You're about to get bounced into the vast reaches of space. You're lucky you're not getting killed, Darth. Only a master of evil, Darth. Return of the Jedi is a phenomenal film. the Ewoks show up, and it's still okay, but it's a 3.5 out of 4-star movie instead of what I believe 4 stars for episodes 4 and 5. But Lucas, by creating the Indiana Jones series, and there are moments, and I said this the other day, when Roger Corman passed. It's another name that a lot of the young people may not be that familiar with. But Roger Corman he made a lot of schlocky movies, but a lot of famous filmmakers worked for him on the way up, including Francis Coppola and James Cameron, among many others. And you can Google this. You won't believe the number of major filmmakers. Like Coppola posted a picture with him when he passed. Coppola's distraught. This guy gave me one of my earliest jobs. I loved him. But when I talk about being a fly on the wall for certain conversations, this doesn't have anything to do with George Lucas. Roger Corman passed, and I was thinking of the movie Creepshow 2, which I talked about on the channel. Creepshow 2 was produced by Roger Corman's New World Pictures. That was kind of a big independent production shingle that Corman produced a number of movies with in the 80s. Creepshow 2, produced by New World Pictures. Based on stories by Stephen King, including The Raft, which appeared in Skeleton Crew, the same collection of stories that included The Mist, among others. Roger Corman, Stephen King, and George Romero adapted King's work into the screenplays for Creepshow 2. Fly on the wall. Roger Corman, George Romero, Stephen King, talking horror. Well, that's one. But at a certain point in history, probably around the time that Empire Strikes Back was in production, Steven Spielberg and his already very good friend, George Lucas, started talking about what they might do next. And they both talked of their love for the old school kind of 1940s and 50s adventure movies, action movies, most of which were shot on limited budgets, on sound stages of the day. Not really that great. But what if we did something like that? The weekly serial adventure story. We did something like that, but with a big budget. Because by that point, both guys could have gotten any movie made pretty much by any studio. How about that? From those conversations, here comes Raiders of the Lost Ark. Not only an enormous hit, but a genuinely great motion picture. And a movie that many people think should have won Best Picture for films released in 1981. I don't agree. That's the year of Chariots of Fire. Sorry. As much as I love Raiders of the Lost Ark, I will go down on the hill. The Academy got that one right. Come at me, bro. Raiders of the Lost Ark, enormous acclaim, Oscar nominations, huge box office. 3 years later, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This is where friends Quentin Tarantino and Spielberg have a difference of opinion. With me too. I love Temple of Doom. If I'm asked a question, what is the most rewatchable of the 5 Indiana Jones films? The answer is Temple of Doom. I will answer without hesitation. I would say that Raiders is the best movie. And I actually think the second best movie is Last Crusade. Temple of Doom is compulsively rewatchable. It is one great scene after another until it ends. One after another. It's what Roger Ebert called the greatest bruised forearm movie ever made. And what Roger meant was, it's the kind of film that's so exciting that you're constantly hitting the person next to you. Hopefully it's a person you know, so you don't get into a brawl. Temple of Doom is extraordinary. And the issue with Tarantino is, he has said, and Tarantino said a lot of contradictory things in interviews because he is very much, he's a guy who does not sound like a normal smart person. I could have mentioned him. I believe his IQ is probably approaching where Kubrick was. Kubrick supposedly had an IQ in the Einstein, Oppenheimer, Marie Curie range. And I don't doubt it for a second. But Kubrick was an absolute monster chess player. He probably could have been Bobby Fischer at chess if he hadn't been such a picture-taking prodigy. But the idea here is that Tarantino has claimed he doesn't like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I love Sean Connery. You know I love Steven. And I love the character of Indiana Jones. But I don't find that movie as interesting as everyone else. And Quentin kind of jokingly said, I hate when Steven says he doesn't like Temple of Doom. I think that's the best movie he made in the whole trilogy, the whole series. Tarantino is not simply, and has not simply said, that Temple of Doom, like me, is the most rewatchable. He believes it's the best film. He loves it because it's dark. Because Spielberg and Lucas, Steven was having marital problems at the time, and George, there was some things going wrong in his life. They went way darker than they would at other points in their life. And Tarantino loved the fact that Spielberg didn't keep it light and frothy. Although, to be fair, Raiders of the Lost Ark's pretty fucking sick, too. But not to the level of guy getting a heart ripped out of his chest. Not quite that dark. And certainly the third one, although dealing with very heavy themes, there is a lightness of spirit. Oh, and I'll give you another thing. Given George Lucas, when people ask me, and I remember when he passed a number of years ago, what's the first thing you think of when you think of Sean Connery? I don't say 007. I say Dr. Henry Jones Sr. That is how indelible that character that George Lucas had a hand in creating, that is how indelible that character is for me. That when I think of Connery, my first thought isn't, pussy galore, I must be dreaming. My first thought is, Junior, it is you, Junior. Henry Jones Sr., George Lucas. You know, there's always controversy everywhere. And there is certainly a sense among many people that, oh, this is a new concept, a new thought process, just as far as how we view films, how we view franchises, going back and kind of relitigating things back in the day. As a historian, as a memory person, I can tell you from experience, and this is something that you can certainly Google and check up on me. When the prequels hit, well, even before that, when George Lucas started to tinker with the original trilogy, when they brought them back into theaters in the first quarter of 1997, I saw Star Wars Episode 4 on the big screen. First time I saw it on the big screen. Here's your Generation X absurdity. The Gen Xers lament. I didn't get to watch any Star Wars movie until I was 9, even though people had been talking about them since nursery school. And why is that? Well, why don't you tell me where I was supposed to see it or how I was supposed to see it? There was no VHS when I was 5 or 6. Didn't exist yet. HBO didn't air any of the movies a year after they hit theaters. There's no streaming. There's nothing. I did not see Star Wars Episode 4 until it premiered on HBO, same month my sister was born, June of 1983. I had heard about it for years. That is something that can never happen again. Null set. Now, you have a young kid, 5, 6 years old, who learns of Star Wars and says to maybe mom or dad or a brother or even a friend, they're at the house, hey, I'm interested in seeing any Star Wars movie. Do you have a channel? Yeah, we get Disney. And you go from there. So just from that, the idea of having to wait and then having the movie, in the case of Star Wars Episode 4, I watched it on a 13-inch television, George Lucas's baby, that Peter Cushing thought was a disaster, and Alec Guinness didn't know what the fuck was going on. It's like the old Cary Grant, North by Northwest. We're almost done shooting the film, and I don't even know what the hell it's about. Alec Guinness probably thought it was a disaster. He was getting paid okay, and he thought George was nice enough. He's a nice kid, and I like Mark, whatever. My first time seeing Star Wars Episode 4, I was blown away. Favorite movie next to Chariots of Fire of all time. On a 13-inch TV with normal sound. So, 14 years later, seeing it on the big screen, even though I'd already watched it at least a dozen times, blown away. But a lot of Gen Xers, and maybe a couple of elder millennials were complaining nonstop, how dare George Lucas fuck with our beloved films? George Lucas has ruined my childhood. Because he added Jabba the Hutt he added a CGI Jabba the Hutt. Greedo shoots first. OMG, this affects my life in a very meaningful way. In 1997, I am going to cry myself a river and hate George Lucas. Even though I claim to love Star Wars, George Lucas destroyed my childhood. Cry me a river. Oh, but then the prequels came out and George directed them. And I remember the first one. It was one of the most eagerly anticipated trailers in the previous decade. When Batman, the Tim Burton Batman, the trailer was so hot and people were so excited for it and they'd heard the buzz, this is the greatest trailer ever. There were people who were paying for movie tickets, going in to see the trailer and going home without seeing the movie, punting the $20 or whatever the fuck it cost in 1989. People did the same thing with The Phantom Menace, although Phantom Menace was one of the first trailers widely distributed and illegally downloaded, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, on the internet. So I saw Phantom Menace 3 times in theaters. It's not as good as any of the originals, no shit. But people who said it was a disaster, no, it's not. Bullshit. Yeah, that nonsense about the Trade Federation and Chancellor Valorum, as great as it was to see Terrence Stamp, that was a joke of a character. The Emperor, he's not really the Emperor yet, he's just Palpatine. The movie had a lot of problems, but it worked. Liam Neeson, magnificent. Ewan McGregor, fucking brilliant casting. Because when the originals were brought back to theaters in 97, before Lucas had fixed on what he was going to do with casting, they were talking about Kenneth Branagh. There was an idea that Branagh was not going to play Qui-Gon, but that Branagh was going to play Obi-Wan. And then Lucas recalculated and said, no, he's going to be too old. Can't do it. So he went in a different direction. He went with a younger Obi-Wan, and it worked brilliantly. And I love Natalie Portman in that. She doesn't have very much to do, but I love what she did with that. But Jar Jar Binks is that movie's Ewok. Okay, I agree. But the hate flying at George Lucas, and again, just as when he tinkered, George Lucas destroyed my childhood. So then Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, gun to my head, I think is the worst Star Wars film out of the 9. Still entertaining. I'd still give it 3 stars out of 5 or 2.5 plus out of 4. It's a lot of fun. I love Christopher Lee, one of the all-time greats. Sir Christopher Lee, the man who knew J.R.R. Tolkien. And then he got to be in Lord of the Rings as Saruman. Christopher Lee, top 3 greatest vampire in the history of movies. Horror of Dracula, among many others. But Attack of the Clones came out, and we heard the same thing as with Phantom Menace. George Lucas continues to destroy our childhood. Revenge of the Sith, a lot of the, he's destroyed my childhood, F. George Lucas, a lot of that kind of quieted down. Now, oddly enough, I think that Revenge of the Sith is not that great. I think it's better than Attack of the Clones, but if you're asking me, the prequel trilogy, I think Phantom Menace is the best film out of the 3. I love the way, similar to Empire, the multiple lines of action come together and work beautifully. Now, where I was going with this, and I'm going to close on this, George Lucas sold the property to Disney. Disney brought on J.J. Abrams to make the movies, or at least, he directed Episode 7. And I thought all 3 of those films were good. I think that all 3 of them were better than Attack of the Clones. And I think Episode 8, which I like the best of the 3, is better than Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith just didn't hit me the way it was supposed to. But I don't think 7, 8, or 9, I don't think they're better than Phantom Menace. Even though Jake Lloyd is weak, he's not great as young Anakin. It doesn't quite work. But I am a fan of all 9 films, and I have Attack of the Clones as the worst. But the idea here is that there are many people saying that 1, 2, and 3, almost revising history, that 7, 8, 9 destroyed the entire franchise. Well, I can't blame George for this. I don't believe it destroyed anything. They made certain choices that a lot of people thought were the wrong choices. Hey, that's baseball, Susan. Nothing's tarnished. Episode 9, people, oh, it sucked. Whatever. I thought it was good. I didn't have any problem with it. It could have been better. But every Star Wars movie, except Episodes 4 and 5, could have been better. I still love Star Wars. I thought the Ashoka series was fantastic. I thought the Obi-Wan series was fantastic. I'm not a hater when it comes to Star Wars. And as much as I can't stand Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I'm not a hater of Indiana Jones. And at no time did I ever say that George Lucas ruined my childhood. We have George Lucas to thank for some of the most epic, iconic franchises, characters, and movies in the history of cinema. A groundbreaking, trailblazing, pioneering visionary. George Lucas, 80 years old today. Happy birthday to a legitimate titan of the movie business. This has been episode 186 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me here on this Tuesday in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 187 real soon. Till then, the Force will be with you, always.